Hello and welcome to the latest episode of This Week in British History with me, Philippa Lacey Brewell. If you love British history, then you are definitely in the right place, so go ahead and hit subscribe. This week we're looking at some of the events which happened in British history between the 2nd and the 8th of November. We have the foiling of the Gunpowder Plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament. William of Orange lands at Brixham, a key event in the Glorious Revolution, and Princess Charlotte dies. But do you even know who she is? The 5th of November 1605 was the date for the opening of the Houses of Parliament. The King, James I, would be in attendance with his heir, Prince Henry, and this had been decided to be the perfect opportunity by a group of Catholic conspirators led by a man called Robert Catesby to launch an attack not just on the King, but Parliament itself. The Catholics were aggrieved after years of persecution. Any hopes they had of any leniency towards those following the Catholic faith in England under James had been thwarted, and now some of them saw no option but to take drastic action. The plot, had it been successful, would have succeeded in blowing up the Houses of Parliament, killing King James I and his heir Prince Henry. Although the authorities were aware that there were potential plots against the king from a disgruntled Catholic faction of the population, they were presented with what seemed concrete evidence of one of these plots. A letter sent to the Catholic MP Lord Monteagle warned him to stay away from the opening of Parliament. That gave the authorities both a place and a date. The letter was received by Lord Monteagle on the 26th of October. Now, although we don't know for sure who sent the letter, a likely candidate is his brother-in-law, Francis Tresham. There seems to have been a falling out between Tresham and two of the other conspirators, Catesby and Winter, in the first couple of days of November, where they accused Tresham of being an informer. However, the conspirators met again on the 3rd of November and decided to continue with their plans. On the 4th of November, a search of the Houses of Parliament, the House of Lords and the surrounding area was ordered. Guy Fawkes was discovered in the basement undercroft which the group had leased since March earlier that year with 36 barrels of gunpowder. This basement undercroft was located directly underneath the House of Lords. Guy Fawkes was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. On the 7th of November, a proclamation was made declaring these rebels as traitors, and Guy Fawkes began to make his confessions under torture. The conspirators arrived at Holbeach House in Staffordshire, where the next day they found themselves under attack by local militia. Some of the conspirators, including Catesby, the ringleader, were shot and killed at Holbeach House. The rest were arrested and brought back to London. The opening of Houses of Parliament went ahead on the 9th of November, where James I gave a speech including a description of the foiled plot. Had this plot been successful, it would have been the largest domestic terror attack to have happened in this country's history. The Gunpowder Plot was over 4 centuries ago, and yet the ceremonies, both public and private, continue to this day. We're all familiar with the bonfires and the fireworks of the 5th of November, and these were the celebrations which would follow the church ceremonies to give thanks for the saving of the king. The church ceremonies have waned over time, but the public celebrations have continued. We're all familiar with the public celebrations, but what about the private ceremony that I spoke about? Well, when the Queen attends the opening of Parliament each year, there is, prior to her arrival, a ceremonial procession through the cellars of the House of Parliament, just to check that no one is going to try and emulate Guy Fawkes again. In my possession from when I was a child, we had these Discovery history packs, if any of you remember them, and in there's one about the Gunpowder Plot, and there is an example of Guy Fawkes' signature prior and after being racked, but it just indicates the brutality of the rack. On the 5th of November 1688, William of Orange lands at Brixham. This was a key event in the Glorious Revolution, which in its simplest terms was another stage in the battle between Catholicism and Protestantism as the leading religion of the country. William of Orange had been invited by the English Parliament to come and take the throne. William was married to Mary. Mary was the daughter of James II. If I take you back a little bit more, James II was the brother of Charles II, because Charles II had died without an heir, a legitimate heir, even though he had lots of children. So James II had come to the throne after his brother. James II had also been a pivotal figure in the Great Fire of London of 1666, which I've covered in a different episode. If you're interested in learning more about James's role in the Great Fire of London, you can download the Great Fire of London walking tour, which I wrote and narrated. It's available on the Hidden Histories app. The Hidden Histories app is available to download for free on Apple Store and Google Play. And then inside the app, if you wish, you can purchase the walking tour. James II was still alive and well. The problem was that he had converted to Catholicism. That had then been exacerbated by the birth of a baby boy. Therefore, the heir to the throne would be being brought up as a Catholic. Anti-Catholic feeling in the English Houses of Parliament was high. This situation could just not be allowed. But what was in it for William? We've already established William was married to Mary, James II's daughter, and he was Prince of the Netherlands being the only other Protestant European country at the time. The Netherlands was under threat by Catholic France. Not only would the removal of James II mean that England wouldn't be supporting the Catholic French, but William, as the new King of England, would have the resources of England at his disposal to fight against a Catholic expansion in Europe. This was effectively a bloodless coup, but William didn't land at Brixham without any protection. He did come with a Dutch army. There's a number of interesting things about the reign of William and Mary and them as individuals. One thing to mention is they reigned as joint monarchs, so we had William III and Mary II reigning together. The second thing is that they were less interested in this idea of the divine right to rule, or that God spoke through them, and we really began to see now a constitutional monarchy. So 1066 certainly wasn't the last invasion of a foreign power into England that took over. 1688 certainly was a Dutch takeover. Invited, but still, Dutch soldiers would be guarding our institutions and our corridors of power. The arrangement, of course, was rather more palatable for two reasons. One, William wanted to uphold the Protestant religion, and two, of course, he was married to an English princess. King James made 2 attempts to escape and was successful on the second one, making his way to France, where he lived in exile with his brother-in-law, the French king, until his death in 1701. On the 6th of November 1817, the tragic death of Princess Charlotte struck grief into the hearts of the nation. Princess Charlotte was the only legitimate daughter of George, Prince of Wales, who would later become George IV. She was married to Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg. Princess Charlotte had already suffered 2 miscarriages, but this pregnancy went to term. In fact, she seemed to be going overdue. The princess had been expected to give birth sometime in late October, but she didn't go into labour until the 3rd of November. Her baby, if it was a boy, would be second in line to the throne. After a gruelling 50 hours in labour, the princess gave birth to a fully formed 9-pound boy on the 5th of November. However, he was stillborn. All attempts were made to resuscitate the boy, but everything failed. The princess herself seemed to take the news quite stoically. She was 21 years old. She would have plenty of time to have more children. Just before midnight, Princess Charlotte began to complain of feeling sick, and she had an awful ringing in her ears. She then became restless and had incredible abdominal pain. The doctors did everything they could think of, but at 2:30 in the morning of the 6th of November, Charlotte died. The personal and public grief for Charlotte's death was palpable, but Charlotte's death not only was a personal tragedy, she was very, very popular. She was a beacon of light in the absurdity that was the Georgian period and the Georgian royal family at the time. But it also represented a constitutional emergency. Unbelievably, she had been the only legitimate grandchild of George III. There was now an absurd competition between the children of George III to come up with the next heir. Mistresses were ditched and wives were found because there needed to be some legitimate babies in this royal family. I talk about this more in my video specifically about Princess Charlotte, but this race to have a baby, to race to have a legitimate baby in the Hanoverian family, actually led to the birth of Victoria, who would become Queen Victoria. I don't want to move on from Charlotte's story without talking about her incredible tomb. It just is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in memory of somebody, and it is a real indication in marble of the grief that the royal family felt. And the nation was feeling similar. Lucy Worsley, when she spoke about Charlotte's death in her series Fit to Rule, talked about it being equivalent to what we saw when Princess Diana died in 1997. She was extremely popular. She was in the hearts, if you like, of everybody. And her death was felt by everyone, home and abroad, and of all sectors of society. And her tomb is incredible. Getting photographs of it, unfortunately, is difficult, because at least when I last went to St George's Chapel in Windsor, which is where it is, you weren't allowed to take any photos. So, I mean, if anyone has any that you're allowed to use, then and you'd like me to share them, then please do send them in to me. I would be really grateful. You can post them on my Facebook page, perhaps. And it's the tomb, if I can try and describe it to you, is of a shrouded female figure lay down underneath this shroud. The workmanship is absolutely incredible. It's surrounded by angels, and there's a baby. I think the baby is shrouded also, I can't remember from memory. And she's been taken, the baby has been taken up to heaven, and all the angels are in tears. It is an incredible monument to somebody who was evidently loved, respected and revered during her lifetime, and severely grieved for when she died. And her death had such an impact on the lineage of our royal family, and yet she's very little known and not much talked about, and indeed goes under the radar. So I am glad to have been able to talk about her today. And like I say, if you'd like to know a little bit more about Charlotte, I have a video that I recorded about her specifically, which you can check out too. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put the link somewhere up here and also in the show notes. And if you're listening on the podcast, then the link to that video will also be in the show notes. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please make sure you hit subscribe, give it a thumbs up, do a comment below, and share it with your family and friends. Help spread the word about this channel. If you feel like you'd like to donate to help me keep making this free content during 2020, it is much appreciated, believe me. And you can do that easily via paypal.me/British History Tours. And everyone who does make a donation will receive a personal thank you from me through the post. So the Gunpowder Plot. Gunpowder. Lord Montague. Is it Lord Montague? Monteagle. However, the plot likely to be no. By the 7th of November, no. And the plotters. What actually happened? On the 5th of November, there was no heirs left. Oh, how am I going to put this? No, I can't say that. Many had to ditch their mistresses. They had to ditch their mistresses. Oh my goodness.